Hi, and welcome to
Distance Learning.
Today on Photography Things, we are going to talk about the magic of tethered shooting. So I'm going to go into in a little bit how we actually do tethered shooting. But first, let's talk a little bit about what the point of it is. So we have some slides over here, or possibly over here. I haven't actually put them anywhere yet, but eventually there will be some slides. So let's walk through a little bit of what we can use tethered shooting for. So first slide here, this is an example of using tethered shooting sort of the way that we would use the ground glass on a large format camera. So we use it as a way to see what the camera is doing, to see if we're working in a low light situation, we can see a little bit better, we can see it bigger on the screen, we can see more detail, all of those things that we would get from shooting large format and that we lose when we're just looking at that little tiny box on the back of our camera. This is a installation in a church done by a painter, Ben Cohen. Made these beautiful little panels. You can't really see in the slide the details on them, but they're pretty awesome. But again, shooting tethered in this situation allowed me to say, okay, this is exactly where I want everything to be, right? This vertical is exactly vertical. I can see in my depth of field, I've got this detail in there. It's as sharp as I need it to be. I can sit there and look at a whole bunch of photographs at once and be like, okay, you know, check off, yes, I've got that one. I've got this one. Did I get one over there? Yeah, I got that one. And it's a lot easier. Especially because with this, we're talking like 8, 10, 12, 30-second exposures. Same kind of thing. This is at the Cooper Hewitt. Diller Scofidio Renfro is a big exhibit design firm. I was hired to shoot documentation when they renovated the Cooper Hewitt Museum for the Smithsonian, and sort of going through and looking at their display cases, right? So again, being able to make this thing, you know, be certain exactly what's in it, check the lighting, you know, make sure that my assistant is not in the shot, all that good stuff. Also being able to, and we'll look at some other pictures where this is important, but being able to show it to someone on set and be like, hey, is this good? And they can be like, yes, that is a good picture. Let's move on. This is something similar for the Museum of the City of New York. So shooting documentation for them of a, the hell was it? This was Stanley Kubrick's photographs. They did a big show of his work. But again, right, shooting tethered means that I can see as I'm making these very long exposures, you know, the degree of blur that I've got in there, you know, if I have things lined up appropriately or not, and I can get sign off on the people who are, who I'm sort of working with to document the show. This is a different reason why we would use tethering. These are images from a SRO, single room occupancy, building on the Bowery. This was a competition, architectural competition that this woman, Kathy Chang, won, and they are, as single room occupancy implies, really, really small spaces. They are spaces that are so small that I could not get myself, right, in the room with the camera to take the picture because I'd be in the shot, right? That's how small it is. There is not enough space for me to be there. I have my camera like all the way up, right, like up against the edge of things. And so I had to run my tether from the room out into the hallway where I could actually control the camera, take the picture. Same thing again. Another one for the Museum of the City of New York. If you look at the person in the room beyond, right, you can see that motion blur on there. Again, things that are going to be more difficult looking at the back of your screen are, how much motion blur do I have? right? You're like, okay, well, it looks fine, whatever, but you can't really tell because you're not seeing the final image, right? What you're seeing on the back of your screen is an image that is essentially a quick JPEG made by your camera to show you a preview, right? So it's never going to be as sharp as the final image is going to be, and you're never going to be able to see as much detail in it as you will in the final image. So by shooting tethered, I'm able to actually tell what the real image is going to look like. I'm also able to see, like, how does the color look, right? How does the exposure look? All those things. Another one from the same show. One other thing, and this is maybe a little bit beyond what you guys are going to do, but especially when you're shooting architectural interiors, and this is true in almost all other work as well, but particularly for architectural interiors, is that I'm able to make those sort of perspective corrections, right? If I want my verticals vertical, I can actually do that as I'm shooting, and it saves me an enormous amount of time in post-production. And you'll get it much more into this next year when you start getting into tethered shooting with Capture One, because you can do a lot of your post-production stuff up front. And I mean, this is one of the major reasons why I do it, is that it saves me from having to go home and spend as many hours doing Photoshop after a shoot. Here's another example of making sure that you have images that can get signed off on by your art director or whatever. These are an image that was shot for the Brooklyn Academy of Music for a festival they had a couple of years ago, back when you could still go out in public. Another shot for Diller Scofidio Renfro. This is at the Museum of Art and Design, a show on the history of scent, right? So it's like, they're like, hey, do you want to photograph smell? And I was like, I guess. So again, right, being able to precisely line up, evaluate what your photograph is going to be able to compare it to a photograph you shot like 3 images ago and know that you have a better one, know that you need to reshoot this one or that one. Really, really important. This is an example more like the Bowery. This is for Jeff Williams. He's a sculptor, splits his time between New York and Texas. Great guy, makes some really interesting work, does a lot of found and repurposed things. Was at the American Academy in Rome probably 10 years ago. This is a show that he had in Williamsburg in a really small gallery. I mean, you can see the whole gallery. Excuse me, right there. Just a little white box. So I'd gone in, I'd made a bunch of photographs inside, I'd gotten some detail shots, but I really wanted to get this shot of the whole thing, right? So you have this beautiful juxtaposition of this white box Williamsburg gallery, and then next to it, you have this guy doing upholstery in what looks like a room covered in tinfoil. It's actually insulation, but and it has this like great, red color, and the light outside is this very industrial blue light. It was fabulous. But the problem is, I was shooting with a 17mm lens, which is incredibly wide angle because I knew I was going to be in this teeny tiny space. So it's basically the widest tilt. It is the widest tilt shift, like perspective correcting lens you can get. It's an amazing lens. It's huge. I used the same lens for the first slide, which was in the church. So even with that lens, I couldn't get far enough back to be able to get the whole image that I wanted in the picture because there was a dumpster there, right? So what I ended up doing, you can see, you can see my laptop in the foreground, and there's a slop sink, there's a dumpster behind that. I had to take my head off my tripod, put it on a light stand that I happen to have this little floor stand in my bag, put that on there, put the camera on top of this dumpster, which was like very rustly and squeaky because it was full of rats. Put that on top of the dumpster, and then I was able to, because I can't get up on the dumpster and control things. I can't see behind the camera because it's right up against whatever the hell that weird trailer thing is behind it. But I'm able to sit behind that computer, control focus, control exposure, Some of these things we can do in Lightroom, some of them we can't. We can control exposure, we can't control focus for this. Actually, no, I lied. I couldn't control focus on this either because it's a manual focus lens. So control my exposure, verify my composition, make those small adjustments on the camera and see them reflected in my shot in real time. And it was the only way I was ever going to be able to take that shot, right? I couldn't handhold the camera. Because long exposure. I couldn't put the camera on a tripod anywhere else. If I put the camera where it was, I couldn't see what the camera was doing. I couldn't take a picture, pick the camera up and look at it, because when I put it back, it's going to be not exactly the same. So shooting tethered, only way I could possibly get this shot. Another example of putting your camera somewhere you can't get to. This is a really old picture. It's shot with this is like BTS shot with like an iPhone 0. This is like 2 apartments ago. I don't even know when this is. Actually, no, I do know. I think it's like 2007, right? Like, were you born yet? No. So this is a photograph. It's a very weird job that I was hired to do, to shoot somebody's paperweight collection. Right? Maybe this is a very famous paperweight. I don't know, because who the fuck cares about paperweights? So in order to shoot these, I built a light table, had these reflectors over there, had light coming down, I'm photographing overhead. There was no way I could get behind the camera, right? The camera is on this crossbar pointing straight down, right? On a table that is like, I don't know, 3 feet by 3 feet. So I'm not going to be able to be on a ladder looking down to try and see what the hell's going on. I had to shoot tethered. It's the only possible way. And I got a bunch of pictures of paperweights, got paid, good for me. But again, only possible shooting tethered. Here's more product shots. This is some jewelry for a company, Dama Jewelry. Doesn't exist anymore. But again, this is sort of a combination of these things, right? So it's being able to set up very particular lighting, right? So I don't want to constantly be reaching in to move my camera or to put my camera someplace. So I can sit off to the side, take those pictures, I can show them immediately to the client, get sign off on them. I can see, okay, is it doing exactly what I want? I can make these small adjustments without touching the camera at all, and then verify that it looks pretty good. I mean, there is post-production going on here, don't get me wrong. Those of you who have me in any other classes ever will recognize these magical things. This is a whole bunch of brass things. This is another reason why shooting tethered can be more efficient. So these are images where I had a whole lot of them to shoot, right? Had to take a whole boatload of pictures. Shooting tethered means that I can get my thing exactly where I want, right? I'm on the tripod, it's locked down, I'm not moving anything, and then I can just take things out, put the next thing in, take things out, put the next thing in. And as I'm shooting, I can compare it to all the shots that I've done before it and be like, okay, yeah, right, I'm framing it up the same. The scale is about the same. My lighting looks the same, right? And I can look at all of the images as I'm going all at once, right? If I suddenly realize something, I'm like, oh, I should have been, shooting in this slightly different way, right? I can be like, okay, I'm going to tag that one. I'm going to come back here and shoot these 3 that I did before. I'm going to redo those ones, right? Same thing again. Whole boatload of diamond rings. They are, if anyone's dad designed these, I'm sorry, tacky. But if anyone has one of these, I'm an ass. Boatload of diamond rings, right? Same thing. Figure out how they're supposed to be, and I can be like, okay, is that at the right angle? Yes, boom, same angle as the other ones. Shoot it. Let's keep going. We got 100 of these to do. Diamond tennis bracelets, like, oh, so many of these stupid things. But they're consistent because I could see them as I was shooting. I could see the one before. I could see the one after, right? No, I can't see the one after. I could see the one I just shot before, right? Can't travel through time. But I could see them as I go. And so I could make sure that they were consistent, and that's going to give you better looking e-commerce, right? Do you want to shoot e-commerce? I don't know, maybe not. I don't want to shoot e-commerce, but paid me, so good. Another thing, right? So Another thing that, and I mentioned this briefly, that you can do with tethering, you can front load some of your post-production, and you can get a sense if an image is going to work a little bit more easily. So this is for the poorly named Unique 2 limousine, right? If it's unique, why is it number 2? I don't know. So this was a limo company. They wanted these images shot. They didn't have a budget. First they thought that, like, you know, the guy's cousin is going to shoot him, and they were like, oh, hey, my cousin shot him. They look terrible. I'm like, oh, no kidding. But they weren't going to rent a proper studio, so we're like shooting them in their warehouse. So being able to have it right there in the computer, throw it into Photoshop, check it out, bring it back in, say, this is what you're going to get, cool, and then keep going to shoot the next like 5, 10, 15, 20 silly cars. All of that made the workflow faster, easier, got sign off, don't have to worry about them coming back and being like, oh, I didn't know it was going to look like that. All that good stuff. Another thing where shooting tethered is incredibly essential for me is judging color, right? So if you go photograph something, if you're photographing product in a studio, right, you're probably shooting tethered, and you're probably doing a lot of the post stuff right there. You know, if you're shooting product, maybe you have it with you when you're doing the post later. But shooting paintings, I do a lot of work photographing paintings for artists, shooting documentation for galleries, museums, whatever. I need to make sure the color is right, and I can't take the painting with me. That's stealing. So I wish I could, because that would be worth more money than what they pay me. So being able to sit there in front of the painting and see it on my computer, the final thing that I'm going to get, make those adjustments, make sure that they're correct, get sign off from the artist or whoever's in charge, means that when I get home, I'm not sitting there guessing, being like, oh, is that the right magenta? Is that the green that I think it is? You're just done. I chose these images from Sarah Fox because they are, like, the color on them. I mean, we shot maybe 6 images and it took probably 3 hours. More from Danielle Orchard. Same kind of thing, right? Really, really particular color, you know, for a client who they need it to be right, because they are going to be sending these to people, and people are going to be spending, like, you know, $50,000 based on what they think it looks like. So it's essential that it is as close. I mean, you know, they're going to be looking on their fucking iPhone on a yacht somewhere, so it's, you know, I might as well just shoot it in black and white. Who cares? But I need it to be as close as I can, just so that they have a better product to show whoever wants to buy it. So let's look at some other people who are not me, right? So Durson Saylor, who I've probably shown some people before, architectural photographer. Again, combination of shooting in a way that is like shooting with a 4x5, being able to see it large, right? It's so important to be able to see it that big. Not going around and having to, like, touch the camera all the time to take a picture, being able to get out of the way of the shot if you have something that's reflective. All that stuff really, really important. Right? He shoots big, luxurious interiors. Barbara Caston. So she is not shooting tethered because she's shooting in the 80s or whatever. But it is the same style, and if she was shooting today, there is a 100% chance that that's what she would be doing. Oh, hello, cat. There's a cat, and it does not shoot tethered, but it should. More Barbara Caston. Some more Barbara Caston. Again, right, this is, if you were always shooting with 4x5 or 8x10, then you wouldn't necessarily need to shoot tethered. But because we're not doing that, because it is pricey, difficult, presents an enormous number of complications, if we want to be able to see that level of detail, if we want to be that precise about what we're doing, tethered is the way to do it. More product. This is from Kate Lacey. His friend of mine does a lot of editorial stuff for Condé Nast, or did. Now she's out on her own. But again, being able to see what everything is, get those pictures, match that color, being able to do all of that on set is incredibly helpful. This is all product that was for maybe Details magazine. I don't know, one of the Condé Nast publications. Greg Vore, right? Again, right? Being able to set up this shot, being able to preview it right there, being able to show it to your art director, whoever it is that's supervising the things, get sign off, make sure it's all correct, do any post that you might need to do right there instead of waiting and pulling it out of the thing and putting it into a camera, into a computer later off site and doing that editing there. Huge. More Greg Vore. Laurie Simmons, right? I showed some of you guys her stuff before. Also, not actually shooting tethered, but if we were to shoot these images today, tethered would be the way to do it, right? You're shooting in this space where you have to really get this camera in to these small dollhouse things, being able to be really precise about what it is that you're going to get as a final product. Shooting that without tethering, it's going to be so much more difficult. If you don't know Laurie Simmons, totally awesome. You should check her out. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. The slideshow is on the website. You can go through it at your own pace. Matthew Monteith. So this was a huge shoot for actually for Dealer's Graffiti or Renfro randomly. It's the same company that I did the work, the Museum of Art and Design, and whatever, the Cooper Hewitt. They got access to Philip Johnson's Glass House. If you are a student of architecture, you're familiar with it. If you're not, you're like, don't know what you're talking about. Really, really, really important piece of modern architecture. It is fairly closely guarded, not in the sense that they're like armed guards around it, but it is kind of held up as this like, magic sacred nonsense. They got permission to do this non-architectural shoot in it, which was super weird. And they went on to make, I don't remember if they made a book or did a print series, or I don't remember what the point of these pictures was. But you're working on a set where you have a huge cast, you have a very, I don't want to say control freak, a very particular about what they want client. And you're working with a whole lot of variables, right? It's a glass house, so you've got a lot of reflections. You have a large number of very complicated shots with very complicated lighting that you need to get in a limited amount of time. You have a lot of people on set, you have a lot of actors on set. You have a large number of images that you need to get and that you need to verify that you have gotten. So this is really one of the few ways you would have been able to do it. You can see it. It's an interesting, it's sort of like, sad, suburban, kind of like scary, louche. It's a good word, look it up. Louche. Lifestyle-y thing, right? Kind of feels like, oh my God, my parents are swingers. Right? But again, very, very, very precise. And that level of precision is really only achievable if you're shooting to something where you can see it and see it in detail at the resolution that you really, really have. The lighting is really complicated. There was a lot of post-production in this, but they were only able to do all of that post-production because they knew they had the shots that they needed, right? They had that other exposure. They could bring them together and double check. So those are some examples of people working with tethered shooting. Again, reasons we do it, control, right? Being able to see exactly what it is that we are getting from the camera as we're doing it so that we can go back and correct something. Front-ending our post-production, right? So making sure things that we are going to have to do later, doing them as we shoot so that we don't have to do them later on, right? Saving ourselves time. Putting our camera somewhere that it can't be otherwise, right? Being able to get that camera into that spot where we want the photograph to be made, but where we can't necessarily also be behind the camera as we're shooting it. I don't know, a bunch of other things. I can't remember what all I said. All of those are the reasons why we do tethered shooting. Art director sign off, that was another one. And although there are certainly ways of shooting that do not lend themselves to tethered shooting at all, right? Photojournalists, they're tethered in a way in that a lot of them are shooting and that image is right going off to whoever their AP person is, right? They're shooting it and it's like uploading. So they are tethered in that sense, but they're not tethered to something where they're looking at it, which is what we're going to be doing. So front-ending post-production, getting your camera where it can't be otherwise, getting sign-off, being certain about what you have. All of that stuff is a huge reason why shooting tethered is incredibly, incredibly useful. I would say that maybe 5 years ago, I shot very little tethered stuff, partially because my laptop wasn't that great. And that now the type of jobs and the jobs that I shoot, I am shooting tethered almost all the time. And the jobs that I'm not shooting tethered, like working on my own, like more documentary architectural stuff, I would shoot tethered if I could, right? If I thought that me bringing not only my camera and my tripod on a bicycle into, some random part of the Bronx, if I thought that I could also bring out a stand with a laptop on it, right? I would totally do that, but that would just be a dumb thing to do because all of a sudden I'm taking up even more sidewalk space. And I'm also looking even weirder. So that's tethered shooting. And now we're going to go take a look at how you actually do it.